Okay, you can go ahead and start the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Projects and Services Committee of the LAVTA Board. Can we have I'll call the meeting to order at 4:10. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Vice Chair Bonanno.
Here.
Director Brown.
Here.
Director Halbert.
Here.
Chair Josie.
Here. Thank you. Appreciate it. Item 2 on our agenda is, item 3 on our agenda is meeting open to the public, where audience members may address the committee on anything that is within our purview. Do we have any public comment today?
Receive any emails by the public, and I don't see any attendees in this meeting currently.
Okay, great. Thank you. Item 4, minutes. Do we have any questions or comments on the minutes or motions?
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Moved by Bonanno, seconded by Halbert. Can we have a roll call, please?
Vice Chair Bonanno.
Aye.
Director Brown.
Aye.
Director Halbert.
Aye.
Chair Josie.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 5 is our zero emissions bus study update. Mr. Tree.
Yes, this is an exciting agenda item. Tone, you want to introduce Savannah in the agenda item?
Sure. So good afternoon. Nice to see everyone. So the long-awaited ZEB transition study is finally here. And now that you all had a chance to review that 100-page document, I'm hoping that we can have an in-depth discussion today. Leading that discussion will be Savannah Gupton, the lead consultant on this project, and I'll let her introduce herself quickly.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you again. Thanks for having me in front of the board. I will go ahead and start sharing my presentation, and I'll do a little tag in and out with Tone later in the slides, but I'll go ahead and get started. Are you all seeing the notes screen or the presentation screen?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Great. All right, so we're familiar to you all by now. It's the Center for Transportation and the Environment. We've been working with you long enough to be addending the master plan already because technology in the market has moved so rapidly. So we're going to give you some updates today on the state of affairs and moving ultimately towards a transition pathway related to the Innovative Clean Transit Regulation. So just a reminder that this is a purchasing mandate and with pursuing a goal of 100% zero emission fleet by 2040, but the zero emission fleet conversion is not the mandate, just the purchase table that's outlined below. So that really drives the purchasing schedule as well as known procurements that LAVTA already has in order to move the transition forward towards zero emission. As a reminder, the Innovative Clean Transit Regulation also requires a rollout plan from every California transit agency and small transit agencies, so less than 100 buses that pull out, that's LAVTA, are due in July of 2023. So a reminder on the technologies that we consider. We currently market available and commercialize our battery electric buses and fuel cell electric buses, 2 different technology types that are both zero emission at the tailpipe. So just a review of the battery electric buses and few considerations is they actually can't perform exactly a one-to-one replacement of the internal combustion engine vehicles. So we use the acronym ICE for those. So that's any traditional fuel type. Like diesel or diesel hybrid are still considered an ICE vehicle. So they often can't run the full range with just a single depot charge. So we often look at other technology solutions that can keep service levels the same. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in feasibility. But they do take a charge instead of fueling traditionally. And the fuel cost can be highly variable because it comes from the grid. So it's often dependent regionally and then also on your demand. So there's higher demand fees and time of use schedules, especially for the Bay Area with pretty pricey electricity. Where in Georgia or something, you can get away with about a nickel per mile in some cases. So the cost is approximately 50% higher for a battery electric bus than a LAVTA diesel bus, but infrastructure costs increase. So you're buying basically a charger per bus in infrastructure for these. Most notably is just the charge pathway, so grid to charger to vehicle over a period of the night to charge. And then if you're doing on-route charging during the day. The alternative or other electric bus, we like to say, is a fuel cell bus. The fueling time is pretty traditional. It's a pump. You pull up, you fuel. We're seeing fuel times of 6 to 10 minutes per bus of the traditional or the available commercial vehicle. The fuel cost, though, is moderately higher than fuel cell or fossil fuel. Sorry, it's forecasted in this as $7.95, and we'll talk about that price a little more. That's currently what OCTA pays per kilogram at the moment. And then the bus cost is about 70% higher. That's because there's only one vehicle available on the market right now. We do anticipate that to come down. And then the infrastructure costs, though, I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, are really where the fuel cell bus gets ahead. So you see here that the entry cost for fueling is pretty high. You have to purchase all the equipment outright, build a station. The price tag on that's about $8 million for LAVTA's transition, but you only build it once and you only make that expenditure once. After that, you're set for the full fleet transition. Where in battery electric buses, you end up buying, each time you buy a bus, needing to have a dispenser or a charger related to it. Start to lose footprint in your depot. You're constantly having to kind of move and keep your depot a bit flexible because you're adding equipment. Additionally, if you're relying on on-route charger, you have to do some land acquisition to charge those vehicles. So to consider what the options would be for LAVTA, we performed our traditional methodology. This is CTE specific. We like to stack the assessments together to get a total cost of ownership, and really feeding into that to make it very specified is an actual data from your service. So we start understanding what service requirements are, what the energy demand of a day in the life of a bus at LAVTA is, in order to see what technology can meet the needs to keep service the same. We never want to reduce service for zero emission. We want to make sure ridership and the public utility of transit always stays the same. And then we use fleet procurement that are already planned or based on the 12, oops, I just lost power. Hang on. Can you all still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Got a breaker short behind me, so I'm in the dark. Give me 1 second. Get the light on.
I think demonstrating why electric might be problematic.
I was thinking the same.
A little on the nose there. All right, so let me see where I was. So part of our facilities or the assessments are stacking. And so we try to do costing related to bus capital cost, then fuel cost per mile of any technology that's still in the fleet, as well as maintenance cost per mile and facility. So how that infrastructure is differing based on cost and when those expenditures happen. That all adds in a total cost of ownership, which all gets folded up into your master plan. So the service assessment or feasibility study that we practiced in the beginning has changed a little bit, and I want to talk about that, but not enough to really impact LAVTA in a way that, or rather it's more demonstrable of kind of where the market is, and maybe a little fortifying on some of the ideas that are going around at LAVTA. And so we based our feasibility study on what a battery electric bus can do being charged just overnight. And so we use the average market battery capacity available at the time of the assessment to see what the energy on board can cover of your service area. When we first did this, we used a battery pack that was a bit smaller. I think it was in the 450s. And recently we've seen a lot of improvements in onboard capacity. So earlier, your original service feasibility was around 67% of service could be completed with a vehicle charged overnight. With improved battery capacity, we're at an average of 536 now. We're seeing about 88% of your service can be achieved by 2040. Now, the big caveat here is that from 2021, with that starting battery capacity, so the average of 530, we're assuming that every 2 years, the battery technology improves 5%. And that's not a known quantity, and there eventually will be a cap on energy storage on board the vehicle. So something to keep in mind, but it does show that there's a little bit more that a BEV can do than we originally indicated. And so we want to be very clear about that.
Can I interrupt for a second? Are you okay with some questions, or would you rather get through it? I just don't want to forget my questions. I'll write them down if you'd rather just get through the slides and then we can ask questions.
I'll defer to Michael or Tone their preference on it.
We're hoping to have a conversation today, so I would prefer that we ask the question along the way.
Chair Josie, you're okay with that?
I'm fine with that. Yeah.
This one's a real quick one. Hopefully they all will be. So when you're talking about the improvements in batteries, the ability to charge to 88%, I think you said overnight. I think that's what I heard you say. That just means the need for en-route charging is decreasing. Is that what I should infer from that?
So it's not a charge capacity of 88%, it's a feasibility of your routes. So it's if 100% of your routes, 88% are feasible with an overnight GPO charge.
Okay, so some of them still potentially, you're going to get to this, I'm sure, but that would say something about whether there is or is not a need for en-route charging.
Yeah, so I think the really telling part of this is that after 20 years from now, batteries still won't have improved to meet all the needs of LAVTA service. So we're still missing 22% of the service that that you all currently supply today with 20 years of improvement. So,
okay,
Savannah, did you want to move to the next slide?
yes. So just like you mentioned, the reason in order to meet that 22%, we can't just ignore it or in this case, or leave diesel vehicles around. So we do have other options to achieve that piece of service that we can't reach with a depot charge. So one option is to add on route charging. And this can be pretty interesting because it can change routing, it can change layovers. It's a pretty large investment at a piece of land that is external to LAVTA's current depot, so often a shared space. The other option is to have a mixed fleet wherein you have fuel cell electric buses that have a longer proven range. They are going out and performing those routes that the battery electric bus can't perform.
Hey, Savannah, I'm not sure it's just me, but it looks like your screen is not moving. It's still showing the flow chart on my screen.
Yeah.
same here.
Hang on, might have been part of my resiliency stunt that I pulled. Let's see. Is it moving? Well, I think I'm not sharing anymore. I have to say, I got set up in my office and they started construction under the window 5 minutes into this meeting. So I had to dash to my colleague's office to spare you the noise.
So now we're seeing your note screen.
All right, now you're seeing.
Now you're in the right format.
Okay.
There you go.
Study. Okay, so we're just chatting about these. And then, so we got to the fuel cell electric bus section. So the other option is to just tackle the issue head on and just have a single technology fleet, fuel cell electric buses only, not really have to worry about duty cycle and assigning sub fleets to feasible routes. So that really offers operational simplicity. Are there any questions on this one? All right. So this is our total cost of ownership slide, comparing all of the scenarios together. Just a note that, you know, this is a 20-year forecast of cost. We do consider inflation, but you can pretty much see that the area of margin between the scenarios is is within parity. So we do see that, you know, at this kind of forecast and the numbers that we're using with a rapidly changing market, the 201 for the mixed fleet and the BEVs and the 214 for the fuel cell fleet are pretty negligible. But it's important to note, you know, that 45% increase on the cost of just operating a standard diesel fleet. And that's important for CARB to know in order to set up agencies in California with the funding they need to create these transitions. I want to talk about each of the pieces of the stack. So that light blue is the fleet. So this is always going to be the priciest part of the transition. Just new technology is so much more expensive. So you're going to spend quite a bit of capital on new vehicles. That's pretty standard. The fuel, right now we have pretty available electricity, low cost, but quite on parity, even with that high cost at $7.95 per kilogram for hydrogen. Not too much of a deviation there, but still notable that the fuel is a bit costlier there. One thing I want to call to attention is in that price per kilogram, we do include operations and maintenance of your station. So we assume that there's a station built on site at LAVTA, but you want to have some of the gas companies or the gas suppliers really handling the technology components of that station. And so that does pay for that to be off of LAVTA's maintenance staff, which is pretty much required with this kind of gaseous or liquid station. So that $8 million is for all of the construction, site planning, and design for a station that can service the entire fleet. So like 72 vehicles. Comparably, the infrastructure for the battery electric buses and then the mixed fleet are 20 and 15 million respectively. The 20 is just the cost of chargers and installing them each time you get 2 new buses. And then 15, you have 2 different infrastructure projects for different technologies. So you don't get a lot of economy of scale on that mixed fleet. You're paying for a hydrogen station and you're paying for chargers. The maintenance costs per miles are a bit higher on the fuel cell. That one's pretty important to talk about because there's actually only 20 of the commercially available New Flyer Excelsiors on the road now. And so we're using first generation, first deployment maintenance numbers. That will typically go down as there's more legacy. So once OCTA can pass on what they've learned and Easy Transit can pass on what they've learned, the vehicle tends to get a lot better by the time it gets to a new buyer. Same is true for any OEM. They learn by doing. And so we have some vehicles that have been operating for 2 to 3 years. So that maintenance cost should come down. Battery electric bus maintenance costs are notoriously much lower because of just the drivetrain. You have the same savings on your electric drivetrain that you do on a fuel cell. So that's where you see some comparability. They're just older fleets. So we get better data on how variable the costing can be.
Savannah?
I have a question. The cost of the buses for the fuel cell only buses, that assumes that there's only one vendor, is that correct?
It does. The only market price that's available now. Mm-hmm.
And okay, and that assumption is made on given that over the lifetime of this project, there will still only be one vendor, correct?
We do project that same price because we can't predict the drop in price when there's more market play, but we can say that it will drop significantly.
Mm-hmm. And the fuel cost, again, assumes no credits, correct?
That's right. I'm going to let Tone talk about that next.
Okay. Member Brown, you had a question?
I did, thank you. And you asked very similar to what I was going to ask. So Savannah, when you say we expect him to go down, we are really looking to you for this kind of information that, you know, we as a board of directors do many, many hats. This is one of many. But when you say a lot, I wondered if you can give me a window. Is that 20%, 40%? Because I'm also hearing that hydrogen in its original infantile phase right now, you're using other methods to create the hydrogen, but later we'll be using water to create hydrogen, that the cost of the creation of this fuel for the fuel cells will come down significantly. Can you give us a little idea? Are we talking about a 50% reduction? Because that's the way I'm kind of hearing amongst in the weeds, but I'd really like to hear from you. What is a lot?
Yeah, so let me address that on the capital bus, the bus side, and on the price per kilogram side. So the first thing is that the New Flyer is the only fuel cell bus 40-foot transit vehicle that's available at the moment. There is an Eldorado one, but currently the most popular and functional one we see is the $1.2 million New Flyer Excelsior. That was $1.2 million in 2017. It's now at 1.1. So we're seeing a pretty dramatic 100,000, and then now on some of the state contracts it's closer to $1 million. So that's dropping pretty rapidly. Once that's a single player in the industry. Now when someone else announces and jumps in, we definitely will see the results of cost competition. And so that is less predictable because I can't say, what Gillig will price their vehicle at yet. But the cost of rare earth metals is pretty high, and generally just the amount of technology components on these vehicles will keep the cost of that vehicle higher than diesel for the near future. It's good to look at the cost depreciation of the battery electric buses. So they've been around for a bit longer. And those were up in the millions as well, and they're now at 800. That happened pretty quickly. So that's definitely, we expect fuel cell to follow battery electric in the pricing, but it really is dependent on how many players announce that they'll have, that they'll be competitive.
Thank you. What about the actual fuel themselves for this hydrogen fuel?
Yeah, so the 795 is rather high. So that's also a deal struck early in 2017 for the fuel cell consortia between AC Transit and OCTA. So that's steam methane reformed hydrogen. That's dirtier hydrogen. It's not a clean process. You do methane breaking. But that's it's a very constrained supply line. So usually hydrogen is used in hospitals and laboratories, not as a fuel. And so that really spikes demand and usage and how much a client will go through in a day or in a week. So that has been a challenge. Supply chain for the molecule has been a huge challenge, driving the price up. But now we have seen and heard of so many announcements. I mean, even in the past year during this project, the first element production in Nevada, as well as and we'll talk about this a bit later, but the distribution that they're building and distribution site that they've built in Livermore really brings localized hydrogen supply and kind of floods the market, as well as other production means that are green being built in certain parts of California with CEC funds. So generally, I mean, we're all familiar with the Earthshot initiative of like $1 per kilogram that the DOE put out, I believe. That's a bit pie in the sky for now, but we do think that the 795 is quite high, that 5 could be more realistic. But also it's really dependent on how online these green reforming or green production sites become.
Okay, I remember, so I sit on ACTC and they've been talking about hydrogen over right on the water's edge, because it's kind of a dirty area that's just been an air pollution problem. So ACTC was also looking to add a hydrogen distribution system for buses right over by water's edge there on the bay. So hopefully, as you said, more will bring about technology and quantity and economy of scale and all that. So, all right, well, that's helpful. Thank you.
Savannah? Tina Bonanno has her hand raised.
Sure.
Yeah, hi. Let's see, a couple quick questions. Have we, in your models, do you only assume that we're going to buy, I think you said 72 vehicles, the current fleet or anticipated fleet size? I mean, do you vary that variable at all to see how the costs might change if we were to see public transit contract versus expand, to see how these numbers might vary? Or do you have a sense of, if you haven't done that, do you have a sense of whether the fleet size matters? That's my first question.
Great question. So we do not assume any change to service. We don't want to decrease it, and we don't assume that it will increase. It's completely constant over the life of the transition.
Do you use your sense that that's not a huge, would not swing these numbers or anything that would be important for us to think about? Probably the answer is no. You're going to say it doesn't matter, or maybe you would have done that, but I'll let you answer.
Yeah, so it's a bit nebulous for us to try to forecast how much, this is not a planning and route study. It's more of a costing study for the transition. And so we don't have, you could tell us an order of magnitude for expansion. So if you add 10 more vehicles, then we'd be multiplying the capital cost by 10. Also the maintenance cost, also the fuel consumed. So we could get there, and it would be such and such larger by that volume of vehicles more. But we don't actually do predictive studies on how your service will change.
Okay, and is there, do you look at anywhere, I don't know how this would be something we would think about or not think about, but do you know what the carbon intensity, sort of the cradle to grave carbon intensity of these two technologies is, in the sense of, producing these buses, producing the fuel, sort of cradle to grave? Is that something that is a factor?
We don't do greenhouse gas projections on, or environmental impact projections on production of vehicles. We can do, swap outs for, if you're not running a diesel, how much is the impact well to wheel for a battery electric or a fuel cell bus? Beyond that's a bit out of the scope of this project. So, but we can understand what the operations greenhouse gas changes would be. But we haven't calculated that.
Fair enough. And then the last one is, there is some assumption for, there's going to be a state requirement that some fraction of the hydrogen is going to be green. I know there's this color scale for hydrogen, but that it's green or comes from renewables. I don't know what the right terminology is at this point, but that's all factored in here as well.
That's right. So Senate Bill 1505 is the bill that commands that rule. So it's currently set at 33% of any transit fuel has to be renewable. In this case, what we're seeing folks do is buy renewable credits to offset that if they're using steam methane reformed hydrogen. What we know to be true for LAVTA is that the Nevada site production from First Element is a negative carbon production site. It's a combination of solar and reformed dairy gas. So it's highly renewable, which makes it a lot cheaper. You get a bit more return on investment with the low carbon fuel standard, LCFS. And so that brings the cost down a bit and also really satisfies that requirement. The 33%, we don't know how much it's going to increase, but we expect it will.
All right, great. Thanks very much. That's all I have for right now. Appreciate it.
Can I make a quick comment on Director Bonanno's early comment regarding potential economy of scale with hydrogen fuel cell buses? So the $8 million on this chart that showed the cost for the infrastructure, that assumed the infrastructure will be able to support our current fleet of 68, but it could easily accommodate a fleet of 100 if we expand at some point with minimal addition to the infrastructure.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thanks.
Director Halbert.
So with regard to the cost of the buses, I'm assuming that the state government is simply going to increase our budget to purchase these. I mean, we're being mandated to move to this new technology. And if the price of the bus goes up or down, it is what it is. We're going to be able to afford these based on increases in funding. Maybe that's a Michael Tree question.
Yeah, Director Hopper, MTC anticipates with federal funding and perhaps even state funding that they'll be able to provide the typical 80% of the cost on these hydrogen buses. So typically the local transit agencies come up with a match on that. And Savannah, you may have more information, but the information that I have from MTC is that they're covering what they traditionally cover in regard to the cost of the bus on the hydrogen fleets.
Great. Okay, thank you.
That's what I was going to cover on the next slide, if we can pull up the slide deck.
Just one other comment, Director Hobart, in regard to the match, we would look for opportunities to apply for matching money from the state. And I think that's one of the reasons why, even though we're not mandated to have this master plan done until 2023, we wanted to get it done early, because the folks who are getting in early are the ones who are getting the grants, which may not be, available later on once the hydrogen or the battery electric bus becomes the norm and the mandate's in place.
Yeah. Another question to jump ahead a little bit. Is it possible that we could be the first agency? We're not a super large agency. We're not a super small agency, but probably on the smaller side. We could be one of the first to go get this done with being an early adopter, receiving an early grant, being receptive to doing this, having the ability to build a filling station, and just the ability to get it done, sort of shovel ready. We could be on the bleeding edge of this.
Yeah, I think so. We have an aggressive schedule that we'll show you that we're recommending to the board on the hydrogen. There's just a lot of good reasons why hydrogen is the recommended technology. And I know I'm getting out a little bit ahead of the presentation, but with that aggressive procurement schedule, I think we attract the attention of the state on getting us a hydrogen fueling facility at the state's expense, as well as the maintenance facility that we would need to maintain the buses, which would be an added benefit. We're currently looking for how to construct the new maintenance facility in the near future over at Atlanta. So I think this aggressive path that Tone will show you in a second at Savannah is a way that we can get more and more investment from the state and the federal government, and certainly would be one of the first, if not the first, to completely convert a fleet into hydrogen buses.
I'll move approval whenever you're ready.
We may be getting this is the danger when you let us ask questions before you're done. We may be getting completely ahead of you, but
Yep.
Is there the possibility that if we're one of the first hydrogen fuel stations, that we can maximize this by fueling other people's buses and other people's vehicles, including perhaps fire trucks and things like that? Is that a possibility?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Any other questions before we move forward? I don't see any other hands raised. All right, we'll give it back to you.
Thanks. I'll actually pass it to Tone.
Thanks. So this is an extrapolation of the previous chart, showing the side-by-side comparison between the two scenarios, the battery only and the fuel cell only scenario. So as Michael alluded to, in terms of the fleet or the vehicle cost, that will be covered by MTC. The only part that we're responsible for is the 20% incremental cost of that. And then if you look at the maintenance cost, is pretty comparable. And then the fueling infrastructure is much cheaper with the fuel cell scenario. So this chart, I incorporate in the LCSF credit that we mentioned earlier. So based on what we've been learning from our peers who are actually claiming the credit, that they're currently getting about $3 per kilogram through LCSF. And the assumption is we're paying $8 per kilogram. So if you net that out to about $5 per kilogram, our fuel cost actually goes down to 18.6. So the overall total cost of ownership is negligible. As you can see, it's barely $1 million if you look at the two scenarios. And with a strong emphasis on climate change at the federal, state, and local levels, we don't believe that the LCSF program is going to dissolve anytime soon.
That's a bit of a risk, right? I mean, just kind of interjecting that, that's our belief, but I think Savannah does a good job of making sure that we know that there is some level of risk there, moving forward in in a decade or two, within this window of the budget.
Can I just ask what LCSF is? If you said it, I missed it.
It stands for the Low Carbon Fuel Standard Program. It's administered by the California Air Resource Board.
Got it. Thanks.
And just to add to that, some of the information on the program does sunset in 2030, but it is planned to be extended already. We're in talks with developers and the legislator. So if you referred to the master plan copy that you all have, there's some narrative about the program as well.
And this assumes that there's enough capacity for us to get the hydrogen from the Nevada project. That's correct? Do I have that right? Okay.
Next slide. Okay. So this is an information item. So we're not asking for a recommendation from the committee today. We'll bring that back next month. But we would like to go over our recommendation and ask for your feedback. So by now you probably know what our preference is. So the first one is fuel cell offer more flexibility. So unlike BEV, where you have to be mindful of the range when you're assigning it to a route or a block, there's no range anxiety with fuel cell. It's pretty much the same as what we have today with the diesel hybrid, offer the same range. And then I'm not sure you're aware, but AC Transit recently performed an analysis called the Zero Emission Transit Bus Technology Analysis, where they compare side by side the performance of a diesel bus versus diesel hybrid versus a fuel cell versus the battery buses. And based on the result from the first volume that they released, the reliability on the fuel cell is much higher than the battery at 90% versus 57%. And then as we've been talking, with more suppliers entering the market, more hydrogen plant are being constructed, we anticipate that the fuel prices will go down over the next decade or so. And then Valley Link is currently in the process of conducting a feasibility study on a hydrogen plant using the 200-acre lot in Tracy. So there's definitely opportunity for collaboration with Valley Link if we end up building a hydrogen plant in Tracy. And then as Savannah demonstrated earlier, fuel cell is definitely a lot more resilient. With battery, you're pretty much handicapped if there's a blackout. With fuel cell, you're backed up. Once the backup generators kicks in, you're up and running again. And I think we already talked about the infrastructure costs. There's definitely economy of scale where you can construct a hydrogen station and you're done with. But with battery, you have to scale up as your fleet size increases. So either you have to install more depot chargers at Atlantis or install more on-route chargers either at the trans center or at the BART station. So I'll pass it back to Savannah to go over the hydrogen pathway.
Thank you, Tone. So I've
It looks like Director Bonanno has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, if you're going to leave this, let me ask a question while we're on this. So the reliability you mentioned there, Tone, is that a full system reliability, or is that just the service achievement number? I'm just not sure what you mean by reliability there. Is that?
So basically, the study they pull 5 vehicles from each of the technology type, and they compare the performance through. Correct me if I'm wrong, Savannah. Was it a 6-month period? And then they evaluate the availability of the vehicle during that time period to come up with a percentage of reliability.
So is it availability? So there's a difference between availability and reliability. So did you say availability or? So I
have to go back and look. Savannah, do you know?
Yeah, and I absolutely understand what Director Bonanno is mentioning. So availability is if the vehicle is scheduled and can pull out on time. I believe these terms often get conflated in data reporting. This one, I believe, was run by Stanford. They beat us out to run it, so I can't comment on their dictionary there. But I think that is probably what they mean by the statistic availability, or that the vehicle was available at pullout.
And again, especially for the fuel cell, it sounds like the data is kind of sparse, and there's error bars on all these numbers. So just anticipating that at the end of this presentation, we're going to make some comments. I'll just say that I think that I'd like to see, when we, I guess, are at the decision point for this, which I guess would be our next meeting, or you'll tell us that as well, a little bit more, digging a little bit deeper in some of the numbers quantitatively, to the extent these numbers exist. Is it reliability or availability? Do we really understand? It looks like it's very favorable for fuel cell, but I want to make sure I understand what the number really represents. So I'll just leave that comment there, and maybe we can talk about it once we get through the presentation. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Director Halbert, did you have another question, or?
I can wait till comments.
Great.
All right, I'm going to do a little switch here. So given my luck today, bear with me. So as a part of the study, we have created a graphic that is kind of the near-term path to hydrogen. So there's a couple of reasons that this is really favorable for the area. Geographically, Livermore's very well positioned to have renewable source, high quantity of availability of produced hydrogen, as well as relationships with OEMs that are likely to join the market for fuel cell vehicles. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about this kind of what a safe bet this can be, and what it would actually look like, and what you would need to watch out for on this path, and really how that goes forward, supposing that it does. And so this is our roadmap to H2. We have a couple pathways here, but there's quite a bit of content here, so I'm going to take it slow, and then maybe at each bubble you can ask questions. So the first thing, the path one, is pretty reliant on a large capital investment from the state or commissioner or the FTA to pay for the capital cost of a station. So in order to pursue this path, you would need a commitment for delivery of the first fuel cell buses in early 2025, and everything about the infrastructure hinges on the delivery date of the first article. So you never want to have infrastructure sitting without a bus, and you never want to have a bus sitting without infrastructure. One's a little bit worse than the other, but it's still wasted fuel if you've got a station sitting there not being used. It's more sad to see a little bus not able to do anything because it doesn't have fuel. So first, timeline commitments are really critical to create a construction timeline for hydrogen. The other really critical path that we always recommend is that you actually have a requirements analysis. So that may look familiar from our methodology of what the energy demand, so the quantity of hydrogen you would need to have on deck to perform a week of service. So that's requirements analysis for the fueling station. It's inclusive of a construction schedule that's based off the bus schedule and the energy demand profile of LAVTA's service. And so it kind of is a caveat, or it captures all of the kind of hardest days and the easiest days of service, and any fleet expansion you might have, you would put into this RFP. And you'd want to develop a really special RFP to make sure, you'd want to have an expert in the room helping you develop that RFP to make sure you're asking for all the right things, and aware of potential falls that could be in the contracting. After that, there's contracting for vehicles, and then there's contracting for the station design build and the fuel provider. Often the fuel provider and the station design builder are the same, but many times they're not. So that's another thing to be really thoughtful about. And then you can get a notice to proceed on construction. So any questions on those two? So it gets pretty rosy around here. I don't cover all the all the things that can happen in construction and production. Oh, I see, Mr. Halbert.
So as I'm listening to the discussion at other meetings like ACTC, as I listen to other commissioners who I know from those commissions that are on ACTC, as I listen to discussion by, for example, the Port of Oakland investing into a hydrogen fueling station, as I listen to leaders at Chevron who are converting from fossil fuels to hydrogen, I just have to wonder if we should be linking arms with other agencies, and at the risk of slowing down, rather, is there an opportunity to have a mega RFP or to have some coordination of effort for purchasing power, leverage, and or sorting out the technology as we move forward? You know, we're, and those are just a few. There's others, you know, in Contra Costa County and in you know, the San Ramon, Bishop Ranch, and other areas that are looking at hydrogen. You know, how can we attack this regionally versus 20 different RFPs from the Bay Area? Is there an opportunity to do that? Is anybody even talking about that?
I can speak to best practices. So typically your station is designed for your operation. So that's a lot harder to conflate with other operations. There's also a concern that if there is a supply chain issue or there's kind of someone has greater demand and gets the molecule first and you're sharing the station, that you might not meet pullout because you don't own the station and you don't own that molecule yourself. So that's why we haven't seen that kind of consortium. But I don't think it's necessarily impossible. I think there can be co-located fueling between agencies with an agreement or different types of service as long as the station is sized to both of those duty cycles.
Yeah, very good. That's really a good call out. Or maybe it's the coordinated effort to buy multiple stations, each one designed for their own needs independently, but rather RFP'd the same time. I don't know. Just trying to think outside of the box a little bit. But anyway, just a thought. And otherwise, again, still in full support. I guess the other question is, when will we actually have to place hard money down and sign contracts? And, you know, letting an RFP is one thing, but spending millions of dollars is you know, another thing. Are you looking at this at next month? Pulling the trigger, go, no go, you know, no turning back, or when does that come into play? When's the no turning back decision?
I mean, I can answer that just in some detail. So we've been working with the state, with CalSTA and Caltrans on the concept of a fuel path of hydrogen, with the sole focus of hydrogen for LAVTA. We've been doing that at the same time. We've been working with them on the concept for the Valley Link project. And I think the timing of it is that the board, I would think we'll see a schedule here in a couple of minutes, but the board would plan the hydrogen path in February or March. We would submit a grant that's being discussed in detail and has been for several months in March to the state for the maintenance facility with all of the hydrogen infrastructure to maintain the buses, as well as a hydrogen fueling station. And that grant hopefully would be awarded probably in the summertime, late summer. And then at that point, you're off to the races. You've got your fueling infrastructure, you've got your maintenance facility with all the bells and whistles to maintain hydrogen. And then you have your purchase of your hydrogen buses. Gillig is estimating that they can deliver that first batch of 12 hydrogen buses in early 2025. So we would time the maintenance facility, the fueling station, to basically time to be available, up and ready to go for for that first delivery of 12 buses in early 2025. So if you chose a technology other than hydrogen, would back up a bit, I think, with the state, with all the planning that we've done behind the scenes to be in a good position, I think, with a discretionary grant that's due in March. But like you, I think we're feeling pretty confident with hydrogen to where we've continued to have those discussions and if necessary, but we're in a good position.
Good, thank you.
Director Bonanno?
Yeah, so I do have a couple questions about this chart. So is Gillig a sole source for these at this point, or we're using Gillig because we always, I'm just not sure why. It sounds like there is another manufacturer. Is Gillig who we are?
It's probably presumptuous on our end, but long story short, there will be an option there. We'll have to go through a competitive procurement to have those 12 buses awarded, whether it be from New Flyer or Gillig or whoever else might be in the market at that point.
Got it. Okay, that's fine. And then do we need 12 new buses in 2025? I mean, is this, I'm a little confused about the timing that the ICT or the CARB or whoever we're talking about here requiring this CARB. Do we need buses in that time frame? I guess we do. I mean, we will have 12 that are at the end of their life, and this will be the new 12.
Yeah, tell them they're replacement buses, aren't they? All 12 of them?
Yeah, they're scheduled to replace the 2011 buses.
Got it. Okay, that's what I had. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions before we continue on down this? Okay, go ahead, Savannah.
All right. And then just to answer the timeline question a bit more firmly, so you would want to plan for an 18-month construction period from site planning, notice to proceed to commissioning with a vehicle. So 18 months back from the predicted delivery of the vehicle was about when you would start to spend money on the capital project. So production and construction occur at the same time, and then you have bus delivery and station commissioning at the same time. I mentioned that that's pretty critical they happen together. One, because you want to accept the vehicle on the terms that it can fuel the way that you want it to before you finally pay off that purchase. And then additionally, you need a vessel for the fuel to flow into in order to commission the station is functioning properly. Ideally, that's your vehicle. Buses can then enter service. Concurrently to this, you'll want to be doing maintenance and operations training on this type of technology for your staff well in advance of their arrival as well as after. And then we often see folks wanting to perform a year of data reporting. So key performance indicators that the vehicle is doing what you asked it to do of the OEM or the manufacturer, and as well as to learn more about your new fleet. So a couple risk and mitigation. So there's been talk about the first element, fueling. This is a huge boon to this program should you elect it, because there is this fueling option if all else fails, that you can also provide a huge safety net that no one else who has endeavored in this would have. So that's really great. So if these do become untimed, the station build and the bus delivery, you can still accept your buses by fueling them down the street. And you could still enter them into service by fueling them down the street. If bus delivery is delayed, then you would still have a bit of trouble with the commissioning of the station, but it can be done with a synthetic simulation of fueling. The big concern here is the maintenance facility and the construction projects at Atlantis Court. So you'd want to time those appropriately, that you're not having conflicting construction projects on the same territory. That just creates probably a headache for everybody. And then additionally, you would need to have a maintenance bay that is outfitted with hydrogen detection. So the safety requirements, because hydrogen has a low flame point, are pretty are required and necessary for safety for doing any maintenance inside a maintenance facility. There is also an option to defuel a bus completely and work on it, or to work on it outside, but those are really not recommended for long term. So that's kind of path one, supposing that the capital exists, and I'll pause there before I move on.
I don't see any questions.
All right. So the other options, in case you're not betting on award for a grant or to kind of supply for a path forward without tons of funding, would be these path 2 and 3. So a temporary fueling contract for both of them. And the first one is to just move forward with the full replacement fuel cell buses, replacing those 2011 diesel hybrids, and then establishing a short-term fueling contract or a fueling contract until you can get funded for your own station with First Element in order to fuel there. This would require a retrofit of your existing maintenance space, which can be much more expensive than the incremental cost of just a new construction project. But you could do that and then continue with on the path of your zero emission transition. Alternatively, if you wanted to run a pilot, you're not so comfortable going all in, you could go for a 4-bus purchase, retrofit 1 maintenance bay, and still have that fueling contract. So these are a couple of the ways forward on hydrogen that we recommended and vet for kind of process and really putting wheels to the road.
So I have a question on path 3 there. If we opted for a pilot program, we would still be needing to buy some, that would basically be that hybrid scenario that was in the full study report, correct? Because we would still be needing to replace some of those 2011 buses. Is that correct? We would be buying battery electric buses?
I think the idea is that you would just buy diesel, right, Michael or Tone?
Yeah, I think rather than introducing 3 technologies in an agency that's pretty small with a maintenance crew, which I think would be problematic. You technically, under the purchasing requirements of the state, you could just purchase 4 of the 12 with zero emission technology, and then the others you'd just purchase with your traditional hybrid diesel that we've been running. I mean, it's not optimal because you're introducing these hybrid diesels into the fleet for another additional 12 years of their life cycle. So, you know, it would be kind of the worst case scenario backup plan, contingency plan to things being difficult as far as having a maintenance bay retrofitted and fueling and so on.
What would cause us to go to path 3? I mean, I know that's in some sense a question. Well, what would drive us to path 3?
I think it would, I think it would be just whether you kind of the wheels came off, so to speak, no pun intended, on having the money to retrofit your maintenance bays. I think they're about $300,000 a bay to retrofit them. And I just can't imagine we couldn't find sufficient dollars to retrofit 2. But if we couldn't, certainly we could probably come up with a retrofit of at least 1 maintenance bay.
Okay, so there would be lack of capital.
This is kind of assuming
not a risk. It wouldn't be we don't believe in fuel cell buses. We want to try 4 before we commit. It would be more based on funding. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Chair, please.
Yeah, Carla.
Yeah, so whenever you purchase a vehicle or bus right off the production line, first time ever, there's definitely some failure analysis, and the idea of a 4 purchase, just so that if there is some failures that were unintended, makes some sense, at least worthy of discussion. But I want to circle back to a comment Michael made about having the facility, the new Atlantis facility, ready for hydrogen. We had also discussed solar panels on that facility and over the parking lot for fueling get my acronyms correct, the BEBs, the battery electric buses, Are you still planning on any grant to the state, including large volumes of solar panels for electric buses?
You know, we had not, well, we planned on solar at the Atlantis facility, but really to power the maintenance facility and to power the admin and operations buildings. The problem with a big solar field on your cement deck where you park all your buses is that it really limits the way you can use the deck. I mean, we do a lot of training on a big cement deck and have rodeo events, at least we're hopeful to in the future. And if you've got poles everywhere that are, you know, that are supporting the solar panels, it just really limits, you know, what you can do there.
What's a
So with
rodeo event? But you're not going to just go past this rodeo. What's a rodeo event in the world of buses?
Yeah, you know, typically a transit agency sends their drivers and they compete. There's like maybe 10 or 11 different events where they drive buses through cones and do different skills tests. And in the past, LAVTA has sent drivers to these events. They happen at the state, and then they even happen at the national and international level. So, you know, Tone and I have talked about getting our drivers back at these events, and to have it's important to have a really clear cement deck or parking area to be able to set up the course. So, I mean, the benefits are huge when the drivers really test their skills regularly in these courses and these events. So,
Horsepower, just no actual horses. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. It's a rodeo rather than a
we have an old bus. It's a radio.
radio. There we go.
Thank you for the additional information. Okay, I see that, but I also see a large flat surface that could be. I thought before the discussion of hydrogen, we had some concept about a large solar facility there. So if we're going all in on hydrogen, it makes sense to make that selection. And then my last comment is really, two. Thank you, David Havert, for Port of Oakland was the term I was trying to think of instead of at water's edge. But yes, Port of Oakland is looking at a hydrogen bus system there for air quality. Last, Savannah, I agree with Gina. There were too many times the PowerPoint slide said, when we get the buses from Gillig, and it really should be neutral for equal bidding process, especially since we're a quasi-government run agency. So with that, those are my comments. Thank you very much for your presentation. And it will be exciting to see how this board the board of directors decides how to take the LAVTA wheels bus system, whether we're going to go electric, hydrogen, both, or whatever the future holds. It's exciting things.
Looks like we have some more slides. You have a timeline you'd like to show us?
Sure, and thanks for your comments. Definitely noted, we'll update all the documents. So I think Tone wants to talk a little bit about process and dates here.
Yeah, so thank you for all your comment and feedback. We'll definitely try and incorporate it for the future meetings. Again, today is only an informational item. We'll plan to take this slide deck to the Livermore City Council meeting on January 10th. And then we'll bring it back to this P&S committee in late January as an action item with the recommendation of selecting a scenario. And then the formal board approval is scheduled for February 7th. If a path is decided then we'll work on the rollout plan and take it back to the board for approval on April 4th. Any questions?
Director Bonanno.
Yeah, I think I got most of my questions. No promises after I hear other people's comments, but I just want to thank you guys for this presentation. It was really, really excellent. I think this is incredibly exciting. I echo Supervisor Halbert's comments about well, he sort of played it both sides. One is, do we want to collaborate, and maybe we would go a little slower to have partnerships that might reduce risk, et cetera. But on the other hand, we have Livermore Laboratory, we have national laboratories in the Tri-Valley, we have First Element, we have just every reason to sort of want to be on the leading edge of this as a transit agency that's, bleeding edge. I mean, I just think this is incredibly exciting. I think we'll save our comments, I guess, on preferred fuel scenario or EV technology choice, but I guess the last question I have is, we are just any comments or would we see, I'm sorry, let me try to say it more articulately. Will we see another presentation that's updated with some of these things, or are we going to sort of cut to the chase at our January 24th meeting and just make a recommendation? Are we going to see, if we're going to see a presentation again, I had a few comments about wanting to be a little more quantitative, a little bit more of a quantitative risk assessment for both these scenarios, where we look at, what are the risks, what are the mitigations. This is a big deal for this agency, and I think that a little more quantitative approach to both options would be helpful for me. So let me leave it there with that question, which is, what are we going to do on January 24th? What's the agenda item going to look like?
We could certainly do a little more quantitative, analysis on the presentation that we provide on the 24th. I don't think that's difficult, and we can certainly get some better definition for some of the terms that you saw in the presentation as well.
I mean, do others feel like that would be helpful? I don't want to ask for a lot of effort if it's nothing anyone else doesn't sort of think is important to have in front of us before we make our recommendation.
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in there as well. I think these presentations are great. The charts changed a little bit from the in-depth report that we got, but the data didn't really change very much, just the charts did. And part of that is based on assumptions, and maybe this had more of a recommendation to it than the study did. And so, because of assumptions, you can make those charts very clearly point to a specific scenario. And so I think I would like to, when this goes to the full board, I think I would like to see those charts show a bit more of a range instead of a conclusion, if that makes any sense to you, because there's so many assumptions baked in. For example, the total cost of ownership over time chart that showed there's really no difference in ownership between battery electric versus fuel cell buses. If you bake in the assumption that we're going to be able to use fuel credits, there's no difference. The other chart showed quite a significant difference in the cost of ownership if you don't make the assumption, because it's a risk, that we won't be able to get credit, we won't be able to use credits. So if we could sort of show, this is the range of costs, this is the risks we're taking. You know what am I being clear? Just so that we really do have all in one place, for those of us who might be visual learners, exactly what our risk is. We think it's going to be here, but your risk is here for both of these scenarios, so that we're really comparing apples to apples instead of, these are our best case under this assumption. This is the worst case under this assumption. Director Halbert.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for the presentation. Staff has obviously put an effort into this. I agree with all the comments and great questions. All of here on this meeting, everyone really paying close attention and asking great questions. I'm going to agree that having a little more sharpening of the pencil and calling out of the risks is important to do, if anything, so that we can show that we're doing our homework and as an agency. And so a little bit more of that would be great, so that we satisfy those questions. I think very important. To my other comment about collaborating with. I would like to understand from our perspective what others are doing, but I think that I've heard enough to know that we can lead the way, but make sure that others are following, at least to some degree, and not going off the rails in a 180-degree direction or even a 45-degree direction. They may not choose to go the same exact direction as us, although I see merit in that, but that the herd is generally moving in somewhat of the same direction as us. I'm fine with leading the way, but want to make sure others are following. And, cautiously optimistic. I want to say full steam ahead, although it's not steam, it's hydrogen, but I do want to make sure that we dot the I's, cross the T's, answer those questions of risk and mitigation, and really nail everything down. But I want to indicate my full support for where we're at, and kudos to staff for the work they put in, and kudos to my colleagues for asking these deep questions. This is how good government works. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Can we stop screen sharing, please, so we can see the entire group? That would be great. Any other questions before I wrap up on this item?
Just last thing, could we get the updated set of PowerPoint slides that were shown? Because I don't think we have that current version. That would be great.
That would be great. Well, thank you very much, staff. This was super helpful. And I want to reiterate what Director Halbert said about asking for that data in the interest of completion, and echoing that I'm also very supportive of this direction that we're headed. And in asking for the data with the assumptions and the bracketing, so that we make sure that we have a plan for mitigating if our assumption doesn't come true, what are we going to do to mitigate that risk that we took? If in fact it didn't pan out the way we hoped it would, so that we know what this is what we're making, this is the assumption we're making. And if it doesn't turn out that way, this is what we're going to do about it down the line. Director Brown.
Chair, would you like a motion to bring this to the board?
We don't need one yet. This is information only. It's going to come
information.
one
Okay.
more time before so the next time we see it in January, then we'll need a motion. Thank you. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to item number 6, which is a release of request for proposal for LAVTA and Central Contra Costa Transit Authority Joint Paratransit Procurement. Mr. Tree.
This is actually my item.
Okay.
But Michael, you're welcome to take it.
Go ahead.
Hey, Jennifer, can you pull up the slide deck, please?
Yeah, I'm working on it. Hold on.
Okay. Okay, just go to the next slide, please. So, as you recall, back in February, the board approved or authorized the executive director to reject all proposal from our own paratransit RFP and enter into an MOU with County Connection, or triple CTA, to establish a 12-month pilot program to use the one paratransit contractor. The pilot program started on April 1. The 2 primary goals of the program was to improve customer experience and also to realize potential cost saving to the authority. Next slide, please. So to help evaluate the effectiveness of the program, and that ad hoc committee was formed. The committee consists of 2 board members from each agency, and they have met twice, one in September and one in December. Many topics were discussed at this meeting, but the main theme of the discussion revolves around the performance of the 2 systems. The committee approved the following set of metrics to be used to measure the performance of the pilot program. Their productivity, which is the passenger per hour, reliability, which is on-time performance, customer service, complaint per 1,000 boardings, and cost effectiveness, the cost per trip. Staff from both agency, along with key staff from the contractor, also meet weekly to go over the data activities and as well as to go the result of these metrics. So next slide, please. So I'm happy to report that through the first 8 months of the pilot, all the indicators are meeting or exceeding the goals. For productivity, we have seen a significant increase in the number of passenger per hour over the last several months. This is mainly attributed to the learning curve. Over time, the schedule have gotten better in optimizing the trips. It also helped that we were able to do share rides again when the state reopened in mid-June. So that's why you see an uptick in passenger per hour after May. In terms of OTP, you probably noticed there's a slight decrease in on-time performance. So with this type of service, productivity and OTP have an inverse relationship, which means when productivity goes up, you typically see a drop in OTP. So the trick is to find an acceptable balance. And I think the contractor has done a great job here. Industry-wide, a productivity rate of 2 passengers per hour and OTP of 95% are considered great. And as you can see, through the first 8 months, we're approaching 2 passengers per hour, and we're still above 95%. Next slide, please. So in terms of customer service, customer complaint has remained relatively low. Not much to discuss here. And then in terms of costs per trip, as the trip volume increased over the last several months, because this cost includes both fixed and variable. So the fixed stays the same regardless of the amount of passenger were transported. So as the number of people, passenger increased, the cost per trip decreases. Next slide, please. So overall, there has been an improved customer experience. The local one-stop shop with reservation dispatching and the mobile app for trip status and cancellation have been well received by customers. On-time performance still hovering above 90%, 95%. And LAVTA has saved approximately $290,000 over the first 8 months of the pilot compared to what we would have paid our contractor based on the procurement we performed, but ultimately rejected back in February. So for all those reasons, staff asked that the P&S committee recommends the board director to approve the request to release an RFP for joint paratransit procurement with the CCCTA. Next slide, please. So if approved today, we'll take the item to the board on January 10th. And if the board approves, then we will issue the joint RFP with County Connection either late January or early February. And the evaluation of the proposal will be performed in March, and we'll take the item back to the board in May to award the contract. And the new contract would start on July 1st of 2022. Any questions?
Mr. Tree has his hand up.
Hey, I just, had a couple of comments. Back when we did the RFP to have a provider just provide services, paratransit services for LAVTA, the previous contract had been underbid pretty substantially, and there was never a really good relationship between the provider and and with LAVTA, just based on the fact that it was underbid and it was always a constant strain for the provider. So when we got these results back from putting out an RFP, there was a substantial increase that was projected for providing paratransit services for LAVTA. And I think just to put it all into context, that's when LAVTA began meeting with County Connection and just asking, is there a way to reduce this cost impact that we're about to receive and at the same time improve the customer experience? So, the good news is, I think, as the ad hoc committee has seen over their couple of meetings, that, you do have a substantial savings by being able to join these two contracts together and increase the volume and increase efficiencies in a lot of different ways. And for the customer, being able to have a phone app where they can track the vehicle, can cancel the vehicle, can call one place and get a ride all the way into the County Connection service area or vice versa has been really helpful, I think. And the only other comment I'll make is that the way that this partnership works with County Connection is that we only pay for the time and or the cost of the trip that's within our service area. So if I'm in Livermore and I book a trip to Walnut Creek because I have a specialty medical appointment in Walnut Creek, our agency is only paying for the cost of the trip from Livermore to our basically our border up in Dublin, and then from Dublin on up to Walnut Creek would be a cost that would be covered by County Connection. So it's got some nice equity in it as far as how the cost is assigned. So, you know, those are the quick comments that I had. It's just one of those partnerships that I think has, you know, it isn't perfect. We've had some hiccups, and I think the teams meeting weekly to talk about those things will pay, you know, big dividends moving forward. But from an overall perspective, I think staff's really looking at this as a great partnership and a win.
I don't see any other questions, so I'll weigh in. This looks to me like it's been a really win-win, particularly for the riders. The customer service metrics really, really look good, and the cost metrics and on-time metrics are trending in the right direction. And so, you know, I really commend staff for thinking outside the box when that original RFP came in so much higher. I think this is just a great service that we're offering, especially being able to go outside of the county borders on one seat. It just makes it so much easier for our paratransit riders. So if there aren't any other questions, I'm looking for a motion. Director.
Before I make a motion, which I'm happy to support, I do have a follow-on question there for Mr. Tone. So so thank you for addressing the cost, because it was something that Supervisor Hubbard and I were concerned about. So I have a Livermore resident. They want to get to Pleasant Hill. They are LAVTA is only covering the cost portion up to the end of the service area, and then everything beyond is by 3 CTA. But what about the return loop? Now, somebody, let's say, has to be at the doctor for an hour. What does that vehicle do? And do they return back to our service area, or do they look for another trip that's going the opposite direction? How complex is the software program?
You want me to take that, Michael?
Go ahead, Tom. I know you're more intimate with the details on this.
Yeah, so just go back to that productivity slide I showed earlier. So the program does have the capability to kind of package the trips together to see how many trips a vehicle can operate throughout the day. So depending on where the vehicle is at that time and where the next potential customer is, that's how they would schedule that trip to that vehicle. So it's pretty sophisticated. So
they could pick up in Concord and come back to Dublin, let's say.
Yes.
So so that LAVTA contracted vehicle for paratransit could pick up and come this direction, but they would not pick up and complete a route within the non-service area. Is that right?
I'm not sure I follow the question.
So if I take my example, they're picking up a person in Livermore and delivering them to Pleasant Hill for a doctor's appointment, and they're going to be there an hour or more. So they have an opportunity, as you stated, to pick up somebody in 3 CTA Contra Costa County and bring them back to Dublin. But what if they only wanted to go to San Ramon? They don't want to go to Dublin, but they're still working their way back. But now they're functioning as a LAVTA vehicle inside 3 CTA's district of operation.
So the way the system's set up, so we have fleet of vehicles that are stationed throughout both service areas. Mm-hmm. And they're a combination of vehicles that are dedicated to LAVTA and their vehicle dedicated to triple CTA. So depending on the need, the way that we could use this vehicle interchangeably, because we do have the toppers that identify that's our service, and all the drivers have our badges and our uniform. So that's how the customer would know this is a LAVTA vehicle versus a County Connection vehicle.
Okay, if they didn't have a rider to come back, they would just drive back to LAVTA or somewhere else their next customer is and make what they call a deadhead, right?
That's correct. And with the recent change in the billing, we're now only paying for the time that the vehicle has a passenger on board. We're not paying for deadhead. So it's up to them to try to minimize deadhead and slack time.
So they
Oh,
wouldn't,
yeah.
I'm sorry. They wouldn't try to pick up a passenger within Contra Costa County and bring them back to the LAVTA service area. I mean, and if they couldn't, they wouldn't pick up somebody that was going close to the LAVTA service area, but strictly within Contra Costa County to just really drive the point home.
So sorry, I'm not following the example.
So a LAVTA vehicle that drops someone off in Concord
Okay.
and picks someone up in Concord and drive them to San Ramon only on their way back to the LAVTA service area, a LAVTA branded vehicle. Because that trip would be solely within Contra Costa.
Yeah, the vehicles are interchangeable, Tone, right? If
They are.
I pick somebody up in Dublin and I take them up to Pleasant Hill or whatnot, and then I pick up a trip that will be solely within the County Connection service area as I'm making my way back to the LAFTA service area, that's fine. And it's just all charged to County Connection.
That's correct.
That trip solely with.
Oh, very interesting. Okay. All right. With that clarification, now that I've got my agenda up here, sorry, Chair, I should have known that from the last item. I'm going to recommend that the Projects and Services recommends to the Board of Directors to approve the service to release a joint paratransit procurement with Central Contra Costa Transit Authority. I make that motion.
Excellent. Do we have a second?
A second.
Thank you. And roll call?
Vice Chair Bonanno,
Aye.
Director Brown,
Aye.
Director Halbert,
Aye.
Chair Josie.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And with that, we'll move to the Executive Director's Report. This one I know.
Hey, well, listen, it's been a long meeting and we're pretty excited for the way things are going. And I don't have anything to report. I put this on there as a placeholder only in case something popped up in between the last time we met and today, but I'm hoping that everyone's having a great holiday season and has a great New Year's coming up.
And thank you for letting us use the bus in the Pleasanton Holiday Parade. Your driver was friendly and was gracious as myself and my grandson toured your bus there as we were queuing up to take down. And I saw it on the video that we have for local TV 30, and it was awesome. So great job. And what an amazing toys for Todd's collection in conjunction with KKIQ. It was a complete bonus and a wonderful event. So thanks for both.
Awesome.
And I was pleased to see in the paper that the stayed the pause on federal funding. So they've stayed the pause, which means the federal funding to transit agencies can flow again while the court case is resolving itself. So it sounds like we don't believe that the federal government's going to win that case about
Judge hasn't changed her mind from the last time she heard the case. And
in 2014.
Yeah, we received a grant, was cleared through. So we've actually received money just in the last week or so. So yeah, it's not a problem. Also wanted to apologize for being a little bit late. I saved this invite when I was in a different time zone. And took me a little bit to realize anyway, but no,
Okay.
but it's good. I'll give a further report. Yeah, there's a long, I don't know how much you all really want to get into it, but we have the judge's order. It just seems like it's going in the right direction. And more and more, I think it's a political thing.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to not be an issue at all for us.
But hopefully, fingers crossed, but yeah.
And I think it gets resolved in February. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it comes back. Yeah, I think they have a hearing, like a hearing on more on the merits than just on the initial stay. So, yeah.
Okay.
So we'll report.
If there's no more questions for Michael, we're going to move on to item number 8, preview of upcoming committee agenda items. Do you want to highlight anything for us?
You know, I just think we'll be back, obviously, with your ZEB master plan, and that's your biggie. And then we'll be briefing you on the grants that we'll be applying for in the spring. And there's several opportunities there.
Great. Thank you. Okay, anybody have any matters they would like to initiate? Okay, our next meeting is scheduled for January 24th, and we will see you then. We will adjourn at 5:40. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New
Happy
Year.
New Year.
Bye-bye.
Everyone, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Bye.